And we're off. Morning all. Hi to those watching the recording. I've had emails from both Lindsay and from Kerry to say they cannot join us today. We're going to talk about reframing, a skill that's relevant in 3 different contexts. First and foremost, it's relevant in coaching. If all we ever do is go, in listening skills, it's really hard to understand why that might be worth several €100 an hour. So, we do actually add value to our clients by helping them to see their challenges differently. And reframing is all about seeing a problem or seeing a challenge differently. Secondly, it's relevant to our clients, to our customers. Why? Because we're often helping them to see their challenges differently. And I had a really good example of that yesterday in a coaching session with a young professional who's very talented, very smart. He's just joined, well, about a year ago, he's joined this very bright consulting team. And he feels nervous when he's presenting to them because he's afraid that he won't have the answer to all their questions. And they are pretty smart people, so they've got some pretty smart questions. And both he and separately, his boss, have flagged up with me that the confidence factor in presenting is an issue in his career. I don't think he knows his boss has flagged that up with me, but I'm aware that his boss knows, and I'm aware that he knows that he's got a confidence challenge in presenting. And the reframe on our second coaching session was to help him to see presentations not as a broadcast where he has to know all the answers, like a teacher in front of a class, transmitting ideas from his notes to their notes without necessarily passing through the minds of either. But instead of seeing it as a transmit, seeing a presentation as a relationship build. So, for example, rather than deferring questions to the end, taking questions throughout to make it interactive. And therefore, the reframe, if you like, was a reframe from doing a presentation to relationship building. And he was quite excited by that because suddenly he began to feel free of all the I need to know the answers thing. He also starts to feel free of his own performance issues, because it's no longer about his performance. It is, in fact, no longer a performance. It is a relationship build. And he's pretty good at that. So it starts to play to his strengths as well. So the reframing from performance to relationship building is actually a valuable technique to pass on to clients as well. That's 2 contexts. The third context, as if all that wasn't good enough reason to focus on reframing. The third context is in sales, i.e. before your client buys you at all. One of the most powerful things you can do to add value in a pre-sales context is introduce a reframe. So you're in your first meeting with either face-to-face or Zoom or whatever with your prospect. They're describing the challenge to you. They're asking you how you can help and what your solution is. And you say something like, before we move on to solutions, can I just share some experience with you on the problem first, before we talk about solutions? So, for example, you are telling me that you've got a dilemma in your career. In practice, when I work with people who have a dilemma in their career, we often find that 2 is a dilemma, but 3 is a choice. So let's look at what the other options are. So rather than solving a dilemma, let's create new options first before we start solving anything. That might be a reframe. There are literally hundreds of reframes possible. What that does in a pre-sales context is it says, this is somebody who really knows my world, first of all, because to reframe a world, you have to know it. And secondly, you're adding value even before they sign up And suddenly it lifts the value of what you're doing with them from perhaps just a listening / reflecting exercise to something that's actually going to add fresh thinking right from the get-go. Now, I've taught reframing to sales teams for 20 years. Well, nearly 20 years. And even established salespeople who've been in the field for 10, 15 years or longer have found it one of the most valuable skills they've ever learned. And strangely, it rarely is taught in any other sales course. Most sales courses are about spin selling, or they're about solution-oriented selling, etc. In other words, selling solutions and benefits, rather than necessarily reframing problems. And customers love interacting with people who can reframe problems, because it really establishes a partnership relationship even before they sign up. That's the why. We'll come on to the what in a moment. Simon Sinek, start with why. Any comments, observations on reframing from your own experience? Gives me a chance to read the chat. See a lot of linguistic chat going on, and good morning. Fine. So it is. Monica.
When I'm listening to you, it's a one word always ringing in my head. It's intention. So this is what intention I have. This is presenting in a field with others. So reframing for me, it's reframing intention.
And what is the intention when we're reframing?
Excuse me?
What is the intention when we are reframing?
This is the presenting example. You told it's to sell and then to build a relationship. This is the for me the intention, to just change it or reframe it.
Yeah. Any other intentions apart from selling, apart from reframing / problem solving? What other intentions might we have when we reframe? Anita? Edita.
Yes, I think our intention would be to make the client understand their problem really, and to open them up to look for the solutions. Because sometimes what I say and you reframe make me really go deeper to what I already know, but then open me up to find the different directions.
Okay, thanks, Edita. Anita.
Well, for me, it's all about changing perspective, because we have a view of our issue, our problem, and that's usually quite limited. It's like we're in a tunnel, but reframing creates these holes in the side of the tunnel where the light can come in and where we can see other landscapes.
Absolutely.
And yeah. So the truth is, we always think we know the truth, that our situation is the truth, but by reframing, we shed a different light on it.
Indeed we do. And in practice, a lot of reframes are shifts in perspective. You know, let's look at this from the customer perspective. Let's look at this from the perspective of your life 10 years from now. Let's look at this from the perspective of your strengths. In practice, a lot of reframes are shifts in perspective. Oh, adding a dimension. Sorry, that's an even more, again, that's a change in perspective. When we add a dimension to a problem, it's reframing. Let's therefore talk a little, before we do that, I love the question, Monica, about the intention. And to me, the intention is always to add value in the conversation, whatever conversation it is. It's to add value somehow. And I don't mean to add value for the client. I mean to add value with the client together, or with the other person. They might not be a client. It's to add value with the other person. And I realize that's a reframe in itself. It's not adding value for, it's adding value with. which is not the same thing. And there is a reframe. It is probably my favorite coaching / consulting skill. It's a lot of fun. It produces real changes in perspective and fresh thinking, as Edita has described, in many, many contexts. And it also deepens the relationship phenomenally, you know, exponentially. By the time that your client or prospect writes down the reframe, if they're noting it down, you've added value. And they often will. It's hard to see on Zoom. It's easier to see in face-to-face interactions. When people write down the reframe, you've probably been successful. Okay, we've talked about why. Let's talk about what. And let's begin with what reframing is not. Right, so we think we know what reframing is. What is not reframing? Strange question, I know. Anita and Beth.
Suggesting what they should think.
Indeed. Indeed. It's not telling. It's not suggesting what they should think. If it's got what you need to do in it, in any shape or form, no matter how sophisticatedly expressed, then it's not reframing. Beth.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Ah, great minds think alike, I see. Yeah. I would also add, from years of doing this, particularly with sales teams, it is not going on to sell them your solution. Oh, you have a problem. Oh, I've reframed your problem. Here's the solution. Reframing is not solutionizing. I cannot repeat that enough. I'll let Bess in. Just let me finish this point, Bess. Reframing is not the same as solutionizing. Reframing is adding fresh perspective on the problem before we go on to solve the problem. And the big mistake that people make with reframing, particularly guys, I have to say, sorry for any guys watching this recording, but we are compulsive fixers a lot of the time. And we think that by offering a solution, we have therefore reframed. And therefore we've added value. And all that's happened is it's gone straight over the other person's head because they don't feel we've even understood the issue yet, far less actually added value to it. Bess.
Yeah, I was just going to add almost exactly what you just said, but in terms of consulting especially, very often what appears to be a reframe could be trying to fit their problem to your tools. So it's the same thing as solutioning, but you'll come in with a sort of idea that, okay, we've got this thing that we know works pretty often. We'll just fit their problem to our tool. And then you've completely missed your client's ask.
Indeed. Indeed. I'm reading Amy's comment. Is solutionizing meaning jumping to a solution? Yes, exactly. Solutionizing means going into solution mode before we have shared perspectives on the problem first. We often feel compelled to do it. In my own case, just speaking for myself, for a long time, and even yet, I find fragments of this thinking. If I'm not somehow offering a solution, I'm not adding value. I can easily feel under a kind of should / moral obligation to be adding value by offering solutions. And I have to consciously go, we'll come to that. Let me just check I've understood the problem. And let me share other perspectives on the problem before we go into the solution. And it really does. Yes, advising, another pitfall, going into advice mode. And yeah, I used to run a program called The Outstanding Advisor once upon a time. I learned to change it. Yeah, a lot of people define themselves by their advice. We'll come to the self-worth bits, by the way, in a moment, because they're very relevant. And of course, the shifts are all reframes. The shifts in the self-worth safari are in themselves reframes. In fact, the entire book is a reframe. If we think about it, it's reframing issues of confidence and issues of energy and issues of self-esteem to a different standpoint, which is unconditional friendship with ourselves. So I sometimes think my entire life is reframes. What for you has been, I shared one example about presentation. What for you has been a useful reframe over the years? From any source.
Sometimes I just ask, what's another way to look at the situation? Very simply.
Right.
Very open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, to look at whatever's happened as a gift, to see the gift in a situation that you might have previously seen as bad.
Mm. Looking at a situation as a gift rather than something bad that just happened to me. Yeah. Very useful reframe. Good.
I have an example of someone who I was coaching who didn't feel comfortable being promoted because he was being promoted above people who used to be his colleagues. And we reframed that in the sense of, well, who would you like to be led by? And then would your colleagues like to be led by somebody like that too? And then, oh, by the way, that's exactly how you are. and it gave them an aspiration and also a notion of helping and adding value instead of being a social outcast or some sort of status change that they didn't like. They realized that it was a necessity. And it changed everything in one flip like that.
Mm-hmm. What was the reframe in that situation, folks? In the situations Bess has just given us, there is a classic change of perspective. What is the change of perspective? From what to what?
From evaluating to being useful.
Yes, it is. It is shifting the perspective from how you want to lead or whether you want to lead or whatever to who do you want to be led by.
Mm.
It's shifting the perspective to the people who are being led. Oh, by the way, that's you. Tremendously valuable for clients and can be done even before they are clients when you get good at it. Okay, some of the classic reframes, let's run through them. I mean, there's no limit on this. The only limit is the imagination when it comes to reframing. This is the beauty of it. It's an endless adventure. But some of the classic ones that you will be without doubt coming across as coaches, I would say top of the list is 2 is a dilemma, 3 is a choice. So anytime you create a new option, you are reframing. If people are seeing problems in 2 dimensions, help them to see the problems in 3 dimensions. You know, adding a dimension to an issue. So, you know, any business issue has the operational side, it has the technical dimension, but it also has the business dimension. Let's explore that. When you take a challenge and you reframe it into different dimensions, you'll often find clients are stuck in 1 or 2. So by adding a dimension, you instantly add value. And again, you can have infinite fun with that one. And by the way, it's a great way to harness your coaching and consulting experience. Adding a dimension to a problem really often unlocks and deepens your client's thinking in the ways Edita described earlier, because they're adding something new. Metaphor, absolutely. And using metaphor in the reframe. So if this is a stream coming down the mountain, into what sea is the river flowing? You know, you can use the metaphor and convey a question in the same moment. Again, it's a change of perspective. Can be, sorry. And here, of course, for those who have been asking, how do I use the shifts in coaching? Well, knock yourself out here, folks, because there's every single one of them are reframes, you know, pretty much along the way. So if we take them at random, Anita has already referred to the reframe from self-evaluation as a leader in the context that Beth gave us, towards how am I useful? i.e., what does this team need? Bess might not have used that language in the scenario that she gave us, but the shift in perspective was precisely a shift from evaluation of self to what does this team need, i.e., what is useful here. That's shift number 4, testing my own memory. One of my favorites, and I know it's one of many of yours, from being interesting to being interested. You know, people burn themselves out trying to be interesting. How about being interested and see where that takes us? That's a challenge. That's also a reframe. Yeah, all of them are. You know, to what extent are you proving yourself here? How about instead of proving yourself, what happens if we start valuing ourselves? It's a shift in perspective, and a shift in perspective is a reframe. What if you didn't need to prove yourself? What if you're already okay? You know, how do you want to value yourself rather than prove yourself yet again? Any others? These are just examples. What else for you is a good reframe?
I'll try one out. It's from a recent situation with a client that was, her partner was pulling away and she was trying to understand everything and from his point of view and just catering to his needs. And I tried to say, well, what about your needs? How would you behave if you were prioritizing your needs? And that seemed to have an impact.
Here we go. And usually when you ask a question like what Richard just did, you get an almost shocked silence. It's like, what's that got to do with this? By the way, being able to hold that silence is actually quite important. In that thinking silence, it's best to not talk or not reframe your own question, which is one of my failings sometimes. So I ask a question, I see the client is thinking, and I fill the silence with another question. Oh my God, really bad idea. Client is thinking, let them think. Great example, Richard, thank you. Monica has added from assessing to, I cannot say it, from assessing to accepting. Do you want to elaborate on that, Monica?
I think it's just the same example as Richard told. This is to accept that I can be selfish, to be selfish, to care about myself. This is what we need to have. So accepting the situation, then I can find a solution, not to judge myself, not to punish myself.
Yeah, indeed. Let me add one or two from the business perspective, because for anyone watching this, they may be looking at it in a business context. One of my favorites, of course, that Fanny will instantly recognize is shifting from being the client's servant to being their partner, and making sure we establish that in a very, very first meeting. So you behave as the client's partner, even if they're not behaving that way. You behave as the client's partner rather than their servant. Because trying to be a better servant often means you're condemned to a life of servitude, of doing more for less. So shifting from being client's servant to being the client's partner. Bess?
Yeah, I think in a business sense, one thing that's very useful is how do people measure things? Of course, we talk about, not assessing, but when you're in a situation where they say they haven't got enough time, or they don't have enough manpower, or they don't have this, or they don't have that, you can reframe into different ways of measuring things. Instead of measuring what a specific person can do, you measure what are their tasks and how would those tasks be distributed, which is, when I bring this up, people do the same thing you just described. They're like, what, but that's Joan's job, but yeah, but it's a job and Joan does it. And that's one that really can make huge differences, because especially now that we're in distributed teams and working, from all different localities, it's even more important for them to have a clear idea of what are the chunks that they're working with. And they're very often they're working with old-fashioned chunks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, I see the relevance. Not only that, but of course, what people measure is what they improve. So if you're measuring using outdated measures, or measures that are no longer valid in the current situation, you're actually missing out the opportunity for improvement. So I really get the value of understanding and reframing what you're measuring. If you're preoccupied with your rate per hour as a professional, then what else could you be preoccupied with that would be of more value? An example very relevant to many professional firms. Okay, there's two places we can go here. Which one shall we do first? Let's do pitfalls first. What are the pitfalls when reframing?
Completely losing focus on what's really important.
Well, yeah. This, of course, is an ever-present pitfall, but indeed. How might that happen in reframing?
You bring in something that I'm just thinking maybe too quickly, and I bring in something to just kind of get them to change their perspective, but it's actually missing the key point that they're actually trying to home in on, and I haven't understood them. It is a risk.
It is a risk. And in fact, it can become an irritant if it happens too frequently in the relationship. Because the client goes, why are you asking me that? Amy.
There's a risk in introducing something that's really close to you that, works very well for you. And you're just really passionate about it. And you want them to think that that makes sense to them, but perhaps it doesn't.
I see so much of that, Amy. I recognize it in myself. I recognize it in, I constantly see coaches in particular coaching from their comfort zone rather than what the client needs all the time. And it's such an ever-present risk. We can never assume we're not falling into it. So I think we cannot be vigilant enough about that. I first saw it years ago in Dublin. It was very early in my coaching career. I went to, I think it was the first event on coaching ever in Ireland. I may be wrong about that, but it certainly felt like that. It was an event in, I think it was the Gresham in Dublin, and there was a role play in the afternoon. And it was about, it was one of these group coaching sessions where everybody coached somebody who was overwhelmed at work, a problem that doesn't seem to have gone away in the intervening 20 years. Everyone coached, the aromatherapist coached from about relaxation, and the lawyer coached from what are your terms and conditions with your client, and the accountant coached from how are you measuring this, and what's the profitability in the relationship. I was like, oh my God, I sat there going, I was about to fall into this, I was ex-project management, so I was about to turn it into a project. And I went, I do it too. It's like, I'm coaching from my own perspective, not from what the client needs. And I don't know what else they covered at that event in Dublin, but I came away shocked with the fact that you didn't get a solution to your problems as a client. You got a projection of the professional that you went to visit. And I've been haunted by that event ever since, You know, I feel that it's such an ever-present danger. We project our own lenses onto a customer's situation and or a problem situation to such a degree that we don't even know we're doing it.
Yeah, I know. I definitely watch myself for it. I mean, it's just a thing like that, you know, you sort of fall into, as is with many of these. So it's just to keep watch on yourself, I guess.
It is. But thanks for naming it, Amy. It is the big one for me. It's the one I have to be most careful of. And it's multiplied by passion, by the way. If I'm passionate about a subject, well, everything is the solution to that. You know, it's the solution to everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it is, but we do need to help people to see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's talk a little, if time allows, I think it does. Let's talk a little again about why reframing is so important. I know I said it at the beginning, but it is such, our intention here is really significant. You know, our attention will follow our intention in this respect. And this time, let's look at it from the perspective of the benefits that reframing brings. And the best way to think about this is try to call to mind a moment when somebody helped you to reframe something. The story that I often tell is when I was struggling with what to do with my old IT business. And I felt I was already on overtime as far as my motivation was concerned, and the millennium had just gone and went, and all it seemed to me is that I had another 20 or 30-year sentence to serve, and it was like, what am I going to do about this? And I'm telling all this to a friend over dinner about the decision I was struggling to make, and he turned to me at the end of the dinner and he says, John, and by the way, he was not a coach or anything like a coach. He was director of an art gallery. Completely different role in life. And he turned to me at the end of the dinner and he said, what if you've already made your decision? What if the decision is already made? And you're just trying to figure out how to execute it? Because, and here he shared the observation, it seems to me, John, you've already made your decision. You're not actually struggling with the decision. You're struggling with the fact you've already made your decision. And now what are you going to do? I was like, oh my God. You know, I didn't sleep all night. You know, with the shock of that, and secondly, the excitement of it. It's like, I've already made the decision. Maybe the 3 cups of coffee I had just before going home might have influenced that too. But I really remember not sleeping a wink the night after that dinner. And it was an excited thing, like a brand new light had just, you know, come across the landscape. And basically that accounted for everything that happened since, including my going into coaching, although I didn't even know what coaching was at that moment. But it was, you know, it really was a road to Damascus experience. And it was a reframe. It was, what if you've already made your decision? What if you're not struggling with the decision? You're struggling with the fact that you've already made the decision, and now what? I doubt if he has any idea, by the way, of the ripple effects of that conversation. I did tell him once. I then lost contact with him some years later, so I don't ever get to tell him the sequel. And I would add that as an aside to today, we never know the ripple effects of some of our conversations with other people. He has no idea of what a profound life-changing effect that had with me. Probably the most influential conversation I ever had, and he doesn't know. You know, just a reminder of the hidden value that's in all our interactions, whether paid or unpaid. But I digress. The point of the story was it was a reframe. In what ways are reframes useful / valuable?
Energy, clarity.
Definitely.
Relief.
I think it reduces clutter, as the example you just gave, as your mind was very cluttered with trying to get around things to try to solve a problem that was already solved. Once you came to that conclusion, you had a free road before you, and that's the way you just described it, actually.
Yeah.
No clutter.
Yeah. Indeed. Indeed. It cuts through the clutter. What else? What other benefits does reframing have?
Perhaps I'm piggybacking on perhaps what other people have said already, but this sense of like momentum, rather than feeling stuck in a situation. Maybe you can at least make a different decision from a different choice and then move in some direction.
Indeed. Indeed. When people feel stuck, they will often procrastinate. And I will sometimes share with clients, by and large, I see procrastination as an effect, not a cause. So if you're stuck, if you feel, oh, I'm getting nothing done and I'm postponing my decisions, I will often share with them, look, let's assume that that's an effect rather than a cause. So let's not work on procrastination. Let's try to discover what's causing the procrastination. And that reframe, often in a very first session, really starts to get your client thinking in new and different ways. I'm not claiming that, of course, it's true, but I'm saying if we make a working assumption here, which, by the way, I passionately believe in after 20 years of experience, I do see that procrastination is usually an effect rather than a cause. So if a professional is procrastinating, it's because something else is going on. So let's start looking into something else rather than helping them to eat the elephant one bite at a time. Just like, yeah, okay, they probably know that already.
It's the same with time management, I
Totally,
think.
totally.
Well, which is a thing about procrastination too, but time management, people will call and say, oh, we really need to have a workshop on time management. And I want to say, well, what's going on?
Oh.
What are you guys doing that you need to manage your time? You can't manage time. Time is.
Yeah.
So how do you manage yourselves?
Yeah. How do you know you need a workshop on time management? Okay, so in all of these ways, it gets your client or the person who's in front of you thinking in new and different ways. And once you get people thinking in new and different ways, you are adding value in the relationship. And how much value, by the way, depends on their world, not yours. So you might think that question was so insignificant. Why would anyone pay me to ask questions like that? Answer, you don't know. The answer does not lie in your world. The answer lies in their world. My dinner friend from 20 years ago has no idea that what he regarded was an offhand comment, probably because he was bored with me talking through 2 courses about the decision I was struggling to make. He has no idea of the ripple effects of that question. So again, the answer lies in their world, not in ours. When you get a client thinking in new and different ways, that is of tremendous value to them. What other effects does it have? Edita mentioned one at the very outset that we should not ignore. It's about the depth of the relationship.
Going deeper.
Going deeper, both in the conversation and in the relationship, for basically the same. There are two ways of saying the same thing. When we go deeper, let's take the example of procrastination that Richard gave us. When we go deeper, when we go, let's assume that's a symptom, what's the cause? Let's look at the factors that might be causing the procrastination. You are now going deeper into the topic. As you go deeper, you deepen your relationship with the client. And that has profound effects for the way you work with them. Because as the relationship deepens, it becomes more longer lasting, becomes more trusting, and there's a greater chance that you will hear what's really going on. Often things they've never fully admitted to themselves. So the depth of relationship is something that will serve you well in many contexts, whether they become clients or not. Even if they don't become clients there and then, they will often come back to you because you asked a very pertinent question. Maybe they couldn't afford your services in that moment, but they will remember you for that depth of questioning. Often for years. I've had a client sign up this year that I've not heard from at least 6 years before. They attended a session in London about 6 years ago. Never heard from them in between. Boom. Turned up instantly. You know, the first session wasn't just a taster session. It was a buying session. It was, let's start work. I have this problem. The trust building had already been established way, way, way back. And again, like my friend from 20 years ago, I didn't know. So we're lucky if we know 20% of the value that our questioning and our reframes actually provide. I suspect we don't even know 5%. How could you quantify it? It might be 1%. There might be people who remember Amanda from, breakfast in Lisbon years ago, and Amanda can't even remember their name by now, although that's unlikely in the case of Amanda, who's actually really good on names. But, often our very presence in a situation can be very significant for someone. So we will, in our next couple of sessions, tease out the 3 contexts I mentioned earlier. So we'll look at some reframes in coaching sessions, probably on our very next call, actually. We will look at a later session, we will look at reframing in the selling context. It's actually the 3rd step of a 7-step process I'll give you an overview of. I don't particularly want to run this as a sales course, but I think it's no harm because we all have to sell, don't we? And we will also look at something we've only alluded to today, which is the value of reframe for clients, as in teaching them reframing so that they can start to reframe some of their own problems. In that way, we're giving them the fishing rod rather than just giving them the fish. And we enhance the value of our work while we're doing it. The beauty of reframing is that it's really one of the byproducts and one of the creative byproducts of self-worth in action in relationships. When we're obsessed with proving ourselves, self-esteem, then we try to measure up to the client expectations. We try to meet client expectations. We try to check that every session was valuable with them. Classic self-esteem thinking. With self-worth, we can go beyond that. We can start to even push back against some of their requirements and go, what are you trying to measure? Why are you trying to measure that way? As Bess described earlier, we can, we can explore what's behind their procrastination, as in the example Richard gave us earlier. We can actually go deeper, as Edita alluded to, and in doing so, establish a true partnership relationship with them rather than servants. And when we teach people to be partners rather than servants, that really takes self-worth to do that. If we're a slave to self-esteem, we'll be forever stuck in the people-pleasing mode that Amy mentioned in the chat. We'll be forever stuck in the trying to meet expectations mode. And gee, there's more exciting things to do in professional life than just meeting expectations. So thanks everyone. for a great session. Going to park it there for today and see you all next Thursday morning.